Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning. I'm Amy Morris.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
Karen, President Biden continues to insist he will remain in the 2024 presidential race, but two critical mistakes in the span of 2 hours deepened concerns about his mental acuity threatening his campaign. Biden mistook two of his biggest allies for his greatest enemies. At the opening of the press conference, Biden fumbled a question about Vice President Kamala Harris.
I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president, but I think she was not qualified to be president.
And before the news conference at a NATO event, the president stunned the audience when he mistakenly introduced Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky as Russian President Vladimir Putin.
And now I want to hand it over to the president of Ukraine, who has as much courage as he has determination. Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin. President Putin. He's going to beat President Putin, President Zelensky.
Well, almost immediately after the press conference ended, at least three more House Democrats joined the growing list of lawmakers calling on Biden to step aside. Biden continues to resist those calls, saying he's the best person for the job and that he has support from NATO leaders.
I'm not having any of my European allies come up to me and say, Joe, don't run. What I hear them say is, you've got to win. You can't let this guy come forward. He'd be a disaster.
Now, at least 16 congressional Democrats are calling on Biden to bow out of the presidential race.
And one of those now calling for Biden to leave the race is Democratic Representative Jim Himes of Connecticut, the ranking member on the House Intelligence Committee. He explained his decision on MSNBC.
And I'm far from the only Democrat who believes this, that the numbers, the trajectory, what Americans feel in their bones right now suggest not only that Joe Biden would lose this race, but that he or we would lose the Senate and the House.
Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut. Former President Obama and Nancy Pelosi have reportedly held some private meetings about the future of Biden's campaign. CNN reports both Obama and the ex-House Speaker expressed worries about Biden's mental fitness and how difficult it will be for him to beat Donald Trump. And later, President Biden said he was not opposed to taking a neurological exam if his doctors recommend it.
If they think there's a problem, I promise you, or even if they don't think it's a problem, they think I should have a neurological exam again, I'll do it. But no one's suggesting that to me now. And I'll ask you another question. No matter what I did, no one's going to be satisfied.
Biden did admit that there are other people who can beat Trump too, but, quote, it's awful hard to start from scratch.
Well, meanwhile, Amy, Trump met with Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban yesterday in Florida. The Hungarian leader posted a photo with the Republican nominee at his Mar-a-Lago resort showing the pair giving a thumbs up. Orban is the European Union with the closest contacts with Russia's Vladimir Putin and has worked to stall Western aid to Ukraine.
We'll have much more analysis on the race for president in just a few minutes, but we'll want to turn back to the markets now. And we haven't said this in more than a week. No record close for stocks. In fact, a tech-led sell-off led to a 2% drop in the NASDAQ and a nearly 1% drop for the S&P. Kate Moore is head of thematic strategy at BlackRock Global Allocation and says the market has a good base to move forward.
Most people were skeptical about the sustainability of the equity market going into the second half of the year. They're a little anxious that we can't repeat returns. I think this message that we're getting now, that the Fed is going to be in a place where they can continue to, or they can start to ease policy and continue to guide us, that is the path into the beginning of 2025, is going to be quite supportive for equity markets.
BlackRock's Kate Moore. A Bloomberg index of the Magnificent Seven megacaps yesterday slid the most since 2022.
Well, Amy, the big focus today is going to be the start of earnings season from the big banks. Citigroup, J.P. Morgan Chase, and Wells Fargo all report this morning. Rebecca Patterson is a former chief investment strategist at Bridgewater Associates.
I think the banking system is really the heartbeat of our economy. It keeps the blood pumping, if you will, in terms of capital and liquidity getting to businesses and households so they can spend and invest and grow. So how the banks are doing is fundamental, not just for my view on the equity market, but for on the broader macro landscape as well.
Former Bridgewater Associates chief investment strategist Rebecca Patterson notes shares of the largest lenders have done far better than the stocks of their smaller rivals. J.P. Morgan and Goldman Sachs are trading near records, while Wells Fargo and others are around multi-year highs.
And a day after inflation cooled in June to the slowest pace since 2021, investors get another key reading this morning. For more, we're joined by Bloomberg's John Tucker. John.
And Amy, the producer price index out at 8:30 Wall Street time may confirm that inflation is looking really good. It comes a day after the consumer price index showed inflation at the slowest pace in more than 3 years. Economist Claudia Saba, New Century Advisors, reacted to the latest figures.
This is the disinflation story. It's here, and it has been here. It's been under the hood and been hidden.
Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago President Austin Goolsbee described the latest inflation data as excellent, adding the figures provide the evidence the central bank is on a path to its 2% goal. Goolsbee declined to offer guidance on the timing of the first interest rate cut, but markets are clearly pricing in September. I'm John Tucker, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, John, thank you. In company news, Boeing has notified some 737 MAX customers in recent weeks that aircraft due for delivery in 2025 and 2026 face additional delays. Sources say the plane maker has cautioned that delivery timelines continue to slip by 3 to 6 months on top of already late handovers. And it's time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. Today, the fate of New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez is now in the hands of a New York City jury. The judge delivered instructions yesterday afternoon to the jury in the Menendez bribery trial. Prosecutors say the Democrat accepted gold bars and cash from 3 New Jersey businessmen in exchange for favors. More than 1 million electrical customers in Houston are still without power after Hurricane Beryl made landfall Monday. With sweltering heat, most customers have been notified they won't have their power restored until the end of the weekend. This woman criticized utility companies.
A lot of businesses are suffering, but when you see the lights downtown with empty complexes, and then you see a mom and pop shop that's closed, that affects a lot of people.
Meanwhile, the current heat wave across the Southwest is especially brutal in Las Vegas. The temperature has hit 115 degrees or more for 6 consecutive days. Actor Alec Baldwin's trial continues in New Mexico. Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, who served as the set's armorer and has already been sentenced to 18 months in prison, is expected to be called to the stand later today. Meanwhile, a crime scene technician testified that live bullets were discovered mixed in with the dummy rounds in several places on the set of Rust. New Yorkers have paid 58% more in food delivery fees since a minimum wage law went into effect in late 2023. The report by the New York City Department of Consumer and Worker Protection suggests that restaurant delivery services have passed on the bulk of these rising costs to customers. Meanwhile, in California, some fast food restaurant owners are scrambling to absorb a jump in labor costs. A new California law boosted the hourly wage for fast food workers from $16 to $20 an hour. Many major fast food chain operators say they're cutting hours and raising prices to stay in business. This man owns 9 Jersey Mikes in Los Angeles.
We've had to cut back on their hours. We've had to cut back on staff, and we're trying to accommodate as much as possible. But when the customers aren't coming in, it's very difficult to pay for the staff to be here.
Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Karen.
All right, Michael Barr, thank you. Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update with John Stashower. John, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. Yankees at Tampa Bay trying to accomplish a couple of things not done in a month. Win a series, win a second game in a row. Didn't happen. The Rays, Randy Arozarena, 2-run homer first inning. Yanks tied the game. Solo shots by Austin Wells and Juan Soto. But the Rays with 3 in the third off Nestor Cortez, who continues to struggle on the road. Tampa Bay won 5-4. Aaron Judge has cooled off. Last 8 games, no extra base hits, no RBIs. That despite coming up in the first inning with runners at second and third, nobody out. He also had 2 on with 1 out in the 9th.
After 600 at-bats, things like that happen. You never want that to happen. You're trying to come through, and just miss a couple pitches. But when it comes down to it, I got to get the job done there, especially in that situation. Down a couple runs, guys working some great at-bats in front of me. I got to keep the line moving there and, either get on base or get the guys over in the scoring position a little bit more for Benny Rice.
The Yanks left 10 men on base, just 1 for 9 with runners in scoring position. What has saved them during this slump, the Orioles have lately been losing. They got swept at home by the Cubs by a combined 21-2. So Baltimore only 2 games ahead. Yanks and Orioles start a big weekend series tonight at Camden Yards. Break up the Mets. They had that stretch where they went 10-25. They're now on one where they've gone 23-10. Citi Field sweep at Washington, winning 7-0 behind David Peterson. Mets home tonight for Colorado. Today will be the 49th Grand Slam semifinal match for Novak Djokovic, his 13th at Wimbledon. He'll face Italy's Lorenzo Musetti. Carlos Alcaraz meets Daniil Medvedev, who Alcaraz beat in the semis last year before he upset Djokovic in the final. Women's final tomorrow, Jasmine Paolini and Barbora Krejcikova, seeded only 31st. Before next week's Open Championship, it's the Scottish Open. Justin Thomas, 8 under 62 for his first opening round lead in 3 years. A 65 for Rory McIlroy, back for the first time since those missed putts at the end of the U.S. Open last month. John Stashauer, Bloomberg Sports, Karen and Amy.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
President Biden made some gaffes while speaking at the NATO summit in Washington. He mistakenly referred to Vice President Kamala Harris as Donald Trump. He also incorrectly called Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky Russian President Vladimir Putin. Still, President Biden continues to insist that he is the man for the job.
I'm determined on running, but I think it's important that I allay fears by let them see me out there.
Now we're joined now by Bloomberg's Kevin Whitelaw with some analysis of this. Kevin, how much damage did that news conference do to the Biden campaign?
I mean, at this point, every little bit hurts. I mean, I think the biggest problem is that, he can go out and, as he did, have a pretty good press conference, sound pretty strong, make some good arguments, make some forceful remarks, and then 1 or 2 gaffes are the things that are going to be getting everybody's attention. So I think that if this press conference had happened, I don't know, say a month ago, it probably would have gone, without a huge amount of attention. But in the wake of that debate performance and everybody trying to focus on every single moment, it's almost impossible for him to truly rewrite the narrative at this point, or at the very least is going to take, weeks and weeks and weeks. And the Democrats really don't have that kind of time if they are going to think at all about the option of replacing him at the top of the ticket.
Is that why we're seeing more Democrats come out now and openly call for Biden to step aside because of that time factor?
No, I mean, they really have to do something before the convention or at the convention if it's going to happen. It's almost entirely unprecedented for it to even happen that way. It's almost impossible for it to happen later. There has to be some semblance of a process if they're going to choose somebody else. But it's ultimately up to pretty much one man, Joe Biden, to make that decision. Essentially, nobody else can make it for him. But every single Democrat that comes out and then calls for him to do it makes it that much harder for Biden, because that the Trump campaign is going to bring up every single one of those and recycle those calls and those remarks come as we get closer to November.
Now, not only are we hearing from congressional Democrats, but CNN is reporting former President Obama and former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi have reportedly met about this, are also reportedly quite concerned. Is any of this going to have an effect?
I mean, we'll see. Biden was convinced in 2020 he was the best positioned, maybe the only person who could beat Donald Trump, and he did win. It was very narrow, but he won. And he's obviously still convinced that he's still the best person to do it now. And the polls are a little bit hard to read on this one. The obvious replacement would be Kamala Harris, and her polling and recognition and isn't that much stronger. So I do think that it's going to be ultimately up to Biden, probably the family around him, his wife, and maybe a couple of close aides. But, almost all of them have pretty strong incentives to want him to stay in the race. So it's a little hard to imagine who exactly is going to be able to come through and change his mind. It's going to be a tough thing. Again, never been done before. Huge risk involved at this point, really, either way.
And behind the scenes, Dems reportedly some are angry that Biden won't leave the race. Is this causing a split in the party?
Well, you can only imagine how many private conversations are being had and calls and emails and texts flying around over this. There's obviously this enormous amount of concern that not only will, if Biden stays in the race, will he lose, but that the Democrats could lose both chambers of Congress, and that sort of puts them in a really bad, really weak position and gives Donald Trump a potentially very free hand to take the country in a very different direction. That has everybody very panicked. I think the problem they all have is A, it's not clear if Joe Biden's going to change his mind, but B, it's really not clear that if you replace Biden with someone else at this very late stage, that the result's going to be any different.
We got about a minute here, Kevin. The president has said he's willing to take a neurological exam. Are we past that?
I mean, at this point, I suppose anything could help, but then the question is still going to be, who believes it? No one really believed Donald Trump's supposed cognitive test either, right? So, I think that some of these things really get baked in. The repetition of some of these clips and moments on social media are super, super damaging to Biden, and trying to build it back, trying to make the case that he's, able to do it and show that he can be nimble on his feet. You can do it a couple of times, but it just doesn't take much to undo weeks and maybe months of that kind of work.
You're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak Today, your morning brief on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed at 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, Sirius XM Channel 119, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Amy Morris.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.